Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of The Bitter Pill. So today I wanted to talk about a topic that's been uh, going around at the water cooler the last few days here in the United States, but there's been a lot of speculation about it and not really at this point any clear answers, and that is the question of why Tucker Carlson, who's the most popular news host, has a highest rated nighttime news and opinion show in the United States by a long shot, or had anyway. He was fired a week ago now by Fox News, and this happened quite abruptly when he ended his Friday show. He said basically, "Well, I'll see you Monday," and then 10 minutes before Fox News put out a news release claiming that uh, they and Tucker Carlson had agreed to part ways. 10 minutes before that, they called Tucker Carlson to let him know that they were canceling his show, and there was no agreement. He was taken totally by surprise, and so prior to, or excuse me, one thing I wanted to note was that there were a lot of folks who wanted Tucker Carlson gone from Fox News for various reasons that we'll get into. There was a lot of sentiment from members of both political parties in Congress. Lots of higher ups in the military wanted him gone. And so let's just take a look here real quickly at what some folks were saying prior to his departure. Let's see. So, just ironically, just a couple days before Tucker Carlson was fired, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez basically said Tucker Carlson should be censored by the federal government, that he should be taken off the air. Let's take a listen to what she said.
Talk about progressive values, I can say what my progressive value is, and that is freedom over fascism.
I believe that when it comes to broadcast television, like Fox News, these are subject to federal law, federal regulation in terms of what's allowed on air and what isn't. And when you look at what Tucker Carlson and some of these other folks on Fox do, it is very, very clearly incitement of violence. That is the line that I think we have to be willing to contend with.
Federal regulation in terms of what's allowed on air.
Okay, so actually that was Sunday, April 23rd, the day before Tucker Carlson was fired. And I suppose she would like to take credit for him being canceled by Fox, but there doesn't seem to be evidence to that effect. But listen to what she said in commenting on the firing.
Tucker Carlson is out at Fox News. Couldn't have happened to a better guy. What I will say, though, is while I'm very glad that the person that was arguably responsible for some of the largest, driving some of the most amounts of death threats and violent threats, not just to my office, but to plenty of people across the country, I also kind of feel like I'm like waiting for the cutscene at the end of a Marvel movie after all the credits have rolled, and then you see like the villain's like hand reemerge out to grip over like the end of a building or something. But deplatforming works, and it is important, and there you go. Good things can happen. Tucker Carlson is
Okay, so she's obviously quite glad that he's out at Fox News, and you notice how she frames this as being about her. It's not framed as something that's supposed to be good for the country or something like that. And I would really like to know where she gets her evidence that anything Tucker Carlson said is in any way responsible for whatever threats were made against her. Certainly, he's mocked her at times, and many other politicians in Congress, but that's hardly the same thing as threatening people. But anyway, let's take a look at what some of the military brass were saying about Tucker Carlson being out. Politico says, good riddance, Pentagon officials cheer Tucker Carlson's ouster. Now that he's off the air, some Pentagon officials are quietly cheering his departure. From maternity flight suits to diversity politics to Ukraine aid, the military was a favorite punching bag for Tucker Carlson. Now that he's off the air, some Pentagon officials are quietly cheering his departure. Carlson's criticism of Biden-era personnel policies appealed to many of the rank and file, which has a large block of conservative members. But at the upper levels of the Defense Department, news of Carlson's firing from Fox News on Monday was met with delight and outright glee in some quarters. We're a better country without him bagging on our military every night in front of hundreds of thousands of people, said one senior DoD official, who, like others interviewed for this story, was granted anonymity. Blah, blah, blah. Good riddance, said a second Department of Defense official. Asked to respond to the news that DoD officials are pleased by his departure from Fox, Carlson responded by text message, "Ha, I'm sure." He declined to comment further. So, there's been a lot of speculation about why he was fired. Of course, it was speculated that AOC appearing on the Sunday talk show and urging that he be fired might have been responsible. It's hard to imagine that one person expressing her opinion, even though she's a member of Congress, would have accounted for that. Another claim is that there was a lawsuit against Fox News by the Dominion voting machine company because of allegations made by quite a few people in the Republican Party or on the political right, including Fox News, that the election was rigged in Joe Biden's favor and against Donald Trump, the 2020 presidential election in the U.S. we're talking about, by rigging the voting machine counts. And Dominion is one of the largest voting machine manufacturers. So they filed a big lawsuit against Fox News, and it was settled out of court for, I think the total was $787 million. So, wow, quite a hefty sum of money. And so, naturally, there was speculation that Tucker Carlson's firing had something to do with that. But when we actually look at what Tucker Carlson said about election rigging and so forth, this is the court filing in the case. And so if we just do a search here for Tucker Carlson's name, okay, so they made a general claim that Fox repeatedly published defamatory falsehoods about Dominion, including by broadcasting and rebroadcasting the defamatory falsehoods of its on-air personalities. And they mentioned several names there, including Tucker Carlson. But when we look at what Tucker Carlson actually said, he didn't say very much. He did invite one of the key advocates of the conspiracy theory that the election had been rigged against Donald Trump through hacking of voting machines. One of the prominent advocates of this theory was the chief executive of My Pillow Company, big pillow manufacturer, and one of Fox's biggest sponsors. In fact, the largest advertiser on Tucker Carlson's show. And he appeared on Fox News on, I believe it was January, I forget. Okay. I think it was January 18th, maybe January. Let me see if I can find the exact date for you. Okay, January 26th of 2021, which was after Joe Biden was in office. Oops, that's not what I meant to do. Oh, great. Let's go back to this. Sorry. Okay, so that couldn't have, I mean, it didn't affect the election outcome, obviously, excuse me, it was after the elections, but Tucker Carlson didn't really say anything, in support of what's his name, Mike Lindell said. He just had him on for an interview. And of course, he did his spiel and so forth. But where is it? On November 19th of 2020, Tucker Carlson did an episode where he called out one of the chief advocates of this theory that the voting machines had been rigged, Sidney Powell, saying that she had made claims that were implausible and failed to produce any evidence to support them, despite having been repeatedly asked for evidence. He said she never sent any evidence despite a lot of requests, not a page. When he and his staff kept pressing Powell to present evidence, she got angry, he said, and told them to stop contacting her. Carlson concluded that Powell never demonstrated that a single actual vote was moved illegitimately by software from one candidate to another. Not one. I think that was a private message, but he said publicly, she didn't have any evidence. So actually, there were several others, most notably Sean Hannity, who said far more, alleging that voting machines had been hacked and that was how the election was rigged. They were certainly not fired by Fox. All the people who made these claims are still with Fox, except for Tucker Carlson. So, doesn't seem like it's that. Another person in Vanity Fair, Gabriel Sherman, speculated that basically Tucker Carlson talking about religion a lot, about his religion and the importance of praying and stuff like that, at a talk that he gave before the Heritage Foundation on Friday, the Friday before he was ousted. Now, this is Fox News that we're talking about. Can you imagine somebody at Fox News, most conservative major news outlet in the United States, someone being fired from there because they're religious and are vocal about it? I seriously doubt that. Another thing that he said, among many others, at this talk that he gave, at the Heritage Foundation meeting, was he basically said that the Republican Party was crap. I forget the exact quote, but he bashed both political parties, that they were both corrupt and no good. And if anything from that appearance at Heritage Foundation could have contributed to his firing, you would think it would have been that. And more generally, if you look at Tucker Carlson's career trajectory, I remember him back when he was a young man. He's a little bit younger than me. He's 53 now. I'm 61. When he was first on, I believe it was CNN. He was this preppy asshole who wore a bow tie, and he was just really obnoxious and super conservative, and you couldn't imagine him saying that he didn't like the Republican Party. And he was a big warmonger. He supported the Iraq War, full stop. And then he mentioned in a recent interview that he went to Iraq about a little less than a year after the war started, and what he saw there changed his mind, and he came back, no longer supporting the Iraq War, and he says that he sort of underwent a slow evolution in terms of his political views from there. And certainly, there are many ways in which he's still a political conservative. He's still anti-abortion. He still has conservative views about immigration. He was definitely not very fond of the Black Lives Matter protests. But in other respects, he's changed his mind. He, just to give you a general picture, he's become a very strong advocate of civil liberties. For example, advocating that Julian Assange be freed from his imprisonment for basically doing journalism. He has been against pretty much every U.S. military intervention that's taken place over the last several years. There are definitely aspects of his views that have shifted in pretty significant ways. Despite that, there have been a number of people who have basically just really kind of ignored the issue of why he might have been fired, and instead focused on their general picture of him as someone who was very right wing, and he gave examples of those sorts of views. So Ben Norton, for example, former journalist with the podcast and political site, The Gray Zone, and now has his um, own outlet, Geopolitical Economy. Generally very good analysis. I like his site and his YouTube channel, but he can be very one-sided in his views of people that he disagrees with. So here he says, anyone claiming Tucker Carlson is anti-war is a useful idiot. He's just a neocon 2.0. The only reason he criticizes NATO's war on Russia is because he wants war on China instead, Ben claims. Tucker lamented, if Russia ever joined forces with China, American global hegemony would end. He claims on the basis of this segment, and let's see how we're doing on time. I'll put a link to this tweet in the video description, but take my word for it, he never advocates for war with China in this segment. Nonetheless, here on the day that Tucker was fired, Ben doesn't mention anything about why he might have been fired, and again, instead his focus is on his claim that Carlson is just a warmonger, full stop. Caitlin Johnstone, similarly, has nothing to say about why Tucker Carlson might have been fired, but is on this rant about how he's just a reactionary warmonger. So she says, whenever I say Tucker Carlson is one of the world's most destructive war propagandists, I get hundreds of people yelling at me like I just kicked a puppy. But I'm right and they're wrong. Here's Branko Marcetic with the receipts. Read first, comment second, she says. Tucker Carlson isn't an anti-imperialist. He's a rabid China hawk, Marcetic claims. Here's his article. I haven't read all the way through it, but basically it's just going through a litany of claims, mostly about things in his distant past that he, when he was just out of college, 30 years ago, he applied for a job at the CIA. Back 20 years ago, he supported the Iraq War, and said some kind of racist things about the Iraqi people, and describes his recent stances, which we'll get into more detail, as a small handful of deviations from the Washington orthodoxy. He says Carlson's dissenting line on Ukraine policy has to be understood in light of his obsession with fighting China, he claims. As I'll demonstrate later, he definitely isn't advocating going to war with China. He says, an awful lot of bad stuff about China. I think Tucker Carlson's very misinformed about China. Without getting into details, just take my word for it. There's a number of things he's wrong about China, and he says that it's a threat to the United States, etc. And the U.S. focus on Ukraine only detracts from our attention to China. Okay, but what does Branko Marcetic think about China, you might wonder? Well, here he says, I abhor China's authoritarian political system. Now, I don't have time today to get into a discussion of China's political system. I've talked about it here before with my friend Jerry Gray, who's lived in China for 18 years, and in other episodes and things that I've written on my Substack blog, jeffmelton.substack.com, if you want to check it out. Basically, this just isn't true. People in China, according to anonymous opinion polls by Western polling agencies, consider China to be a democracy. They can vote for anyone they want at the local level, and anybody can run for political office, and they don't have to belong to the Communist Party, etc., etc. Okay, but I'm guessing Branko Marcetic doesn't know much about China, but he abhors their political system. And here he repeats a common claim about China. He says, "Take a breath, please. The closest thing to a worldwide Xinjiang was the U.S., quote, war on terror and its global network of torture dungeons. No evidence China wants to copy this and extend its repression of domestic dissidents, repugnant as it is to foreign citizens, too." So basically, he's repeating here the U.S. Propaganda claim that, China is imprisoning and torturing large numbers of people in the province of Xinjiang, where its Uyghur ethnic minority makes up a large proportion of the population. And I've talked about that on this show before. Talked about it with Jerry in a number of episodes. It just isn't true. There's no evidence to support that, and that's confirmed by all kinds of people who've been there. But Branko Marcetic, apparently buys into it wholeheartedly, and so by his own standards, given that his opinions of China are pretty similar to Tucker Carlson's, by his own standards, he must be an advocate of war with China, and he actually has said elsewhere, he's very much against that, but as we'll see later. So is Tucker Carlson. Excuse me. Just getting over a cold here. Let's see. Okay. Let's go on to... All right. Just for a moment. Even if it's true that he really is a warmonger, full stop, with the exception of Ukraine for whatever reason, even if it's true, as some people have accused him of being, that he's, far right. Some people have even accused him of being a fascist, which seems kind of incompatible with saying free all political prisoners. But let's suppose that the claims of people like Ben Norton or Branko Marcetic or Caitlin Johnstone or others on the left that he's a right-wing warmonger or something. What the hell does that have to do, even if those claims were true, with why he was fired from freaking Fox News? Quite right-wing news outlet here in the United States, where, as we'll see, Tucker Carlson kind of stuck out with a sore thumb in a number of ways. Somebody who calls themselves Post-Left Watch made a tweet the day that Tucker Carlson was fired, where he basically, he kind of starts with the assumption Tucker Carlson is bad, and then lists all the guests that Tucker Carlson has had on his show. See if you recognize any of these names, for those of you familiar with figures on the American left. Glenn Greenwald, or in the anti-war movement. Aaron Mate, Max Blumenthal, Michael Tracy, Russell Brand, Dennis Kucinich, Tulsi Gabbard, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., Oliver Stone, Matt Taibbi, Roger Waters, Lee Fang, Tara Reid, whose claim to fame is that she accused Joe Biden of raping her 30 years ago, and has a lot of corroborating evidence that really happened. Jimmy Dore, a YouTube podcaster with a popular show. Cornel West, a longtime political philosopher and socialist. Ro Khanna, who's a congressman. and Crystal Ball, a talk show host. Other people who went on Tucker Carlson: Anya Parampil, Zed Jelani, Stephen Cohen, Andrew Yang, Jill Stein, former U.S. Green Party presidential candidate, and I don't know these other people, but in any case, just to fill in some others, like all of these people were, at the very least, people who took a strong stand against wars, regardless of what their overall political orientation was, and most of them are people who were very left-leaning, people who have spoken out against the U.S. government's violations of civil liberties, and so forth. So, Tucker had on his show political prisoner and journalist Julian Assange's father, brother, and wife. He had a number of folks who I mentioned earlier from the political website, left-leaning political websites, and great source of information on foreign policy issues, the Gray Zone. Folks like Anya Parampil and Max Blumenthal and Aaron Mate, former Gray Zone member Ben Norton, I don't think has been on there. He probably wouldn't go on. Jimmy Dore, who's very anti-war, big advocate of Medicare for all, and of civil liberties. Women's rights advocates like Kara Dansey, Kelly J. Keene, Riley Gaines. More conservative-leaning anti-war voices like Colonel Douglas Macgregor, who's been a very outspoken critic of both the Ukraine war and of U.S. saber-rattling at China. Labor organizer Christian Smalls, who very successfully organized labor unions at Amazon, former Amazon employee who was fired because of his outspoken criticism of Amazon for their lax COVID safety measures. Journalist Matt Taibbi was recently interviewed on this show. Matt Taibbi is a very well-known liberal journalist who's most notable in recent times for his work on the Twitter files, where he exposed collusion between the government, intelligence agencies and so forth, and social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter. Well, mainly Twitter was what he focused on, of course, the Twitter files, but uncovered reams of evidence that there was this very organized and deliberate campaign by government agencies to get social media platforms to censor people. So, let's have a look at what some of his guests have had to say. And in the course of that, we'll get a look at what Tucker Carlson himself thinks. So here, for example, he interviews anti-war activist and podcast host Jimmy Dore, that the U.S. is just fomenting conflict all over the world in the pursuit of its imperialist objectives, its pursuit of global dominance. And Tucker Carlson's introduction makes clear that he too opposes the U.S. saber-rattling against China.
So you can be outraged by the people running our country selling out our country to China, and you should be, but that's a very different thing from wanting to go to war with China, a war that we have no assurance we would win, to put it mildly. But in a memo to his troops, 4-star Air Force General Mike Minahan wrote this, quote, "My gut tells me we will fight in 2025. Xi Jinping secured his third term and set his war council in October 2022. Taiwan's presidential elections are in 2024 and will offer Xi a reason. U.S. presidential elections are in 2024 and will offer Xi a distracted America. Xi's team, reason, and opportunity are all aligned for 2025. So what should we take of this? Again, you can be deeply skeptical, in fact, hostile toward China, and still be worried about going to war with China. Jimmy Dore is the host of The Jimmy Dore Show. He joins us tonight to assess. Jimmy, what do you, should we be paying attention to a memo like this? What do you think it means?
What I think it means is that the United States is trying to provoke and saber-rattle with another nuclear power, right? This is what we were supposed to be afraid of what's going to happen with Donald Trump, right? We couldn't have, he's a crazy man who's going to have his finger on the nuclear button, and now we have Demented Joe who is saber-rattling with two nuclear powers, and they get the corporate media sponsored by the military-industrial complex to get Americans to cheer it on. And why do Americans cheer it on? Because they have no idea what's actually happening with their foreign policy, and what's worse is they have no idea that they have no idea that they don't have any idea what's happening with their foreign policy. We have 400 military bases surrounding China since the Korean War. Do we really think that China is getting ready to invade the United States? Because I tell you, they're not. They make everything we use in the United States. Why? Because the same people who want this war are the same people who took the good jobs that are manufacturing jobs in America, turned them into low-paying, crappy jobs, and then shipped them to China, and then we get angry at them for the system that we set up. If they're so corrupt, because that's the thing, Americans have no idea how corrupt their government is. They think our government's just regular corrupt, like, oh, Trump gave his son a job, or Biden gave his kid a no-show job in the Ukraine war. That's not, the whole thing is corrupt. The $800 billion military budget is $800 billion of corruption. Why do we have to have 900 military bases around? We're the ones provoking this war, just like we provoked the war in Ukraine. We are now provoking a war with China. And who benefits? I'll tell you right now, your enemy is not China. Your enemy is not Russia. Your enemy is the military-industrial complex, which has been fleecing this country to the tunes of hundreds of billions and trillions of dollars. How many times are we going to have a defense secretary say, hey, we can't account for $2 trillion in the Pentagon again? Which has happened twice now in my lifetime. So again, people are being, the war machine cannot be stopped. Who's running this country? The war machine. It certainly isn't Joe Biden making these decisions. I would like to know who is making the decisions. And I just want to remind everybody, the United States is the world's terrorist. We just set the Middle East on fire in the last 20 years, and now we're doing a proxy war in Ukraine, which we provoked, NATO provoked, and it was just admitted that we provoked it by the former Prime Minister of Germany. And now we're trying to saber-rattle with China, and they're predicting a war. Again, China's not going to invade us. China's not our enemy. We might have an economic war. That's what these are. These are economic wars. These are wars in Ukraine. It's about liquefied natural gas and making sure Germany and Russia never come together, because we fear Russia's natural resources and manpower, and we fear them getting together with Germany with their technology and their capital. And so that's why we blew up the Nord Stream pipeline. That's why we're doing the Ukraine war. This is all about hegemony, imperialism, and economics. And if there's a Marine somewhere, it's there because they're about to steal some natural resources from another country. As everybody's screaming about what a bad guy Putin is for invading Ukraine, the United States is currently occupying a third of Syria. And which third is that? It's the third that has the oil. And how do I know we're there to steal their oil? Because the President of the United States said so.
And we're not even benefiting economically. Of course, that's the rub. Jimmy Dore, appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, well, what can you say about that? Wow. On a network television show watched by 3 million people a night, Jimmy Dore is just going on this incredible rant criticizing every single aspect of U.S. Foreign policy. Now, do you think that Jimmy Dore was invited on to Sean Hannity's show? No, of course he wasn't. Was he invited on to the other major networks, the MSNBC or CNN? Did Rachel Maddow have him on? No, of course not. Those shows do not have anybody on there who is such a fierce critic of U.S. foreign policy. Tucker Carlson has had dozens of people on with that sort of point of view. Let's take a look at some other clips. Let me see how I'm doing on time here. I don't want to run too long. 40 minutes already. Okay. All right, just maybe one more. Okay. Let's do this. Speaking of the Nord Stream pipeline, Tucker discussed this and said, as many people have said, that the U.S. was responsible for blowing it up, not Russia blowing up its own pipeline, as some people have absurdly claimed, and had on a guest, Aaron Mate from the Gray Zone, to corroborate what he said.
So before the war in Ukraine even began, both Tory and Nuland at the State Department, the number 2 at the State Department, and Joe Biden threatened to blow up the Nord Stream pipeline. Watch.
I want to be clear with you today. If Russia invades Ukraine, one way or another, Nord Stream 2 will not move forward.
If Russia invades, that means tanks or troops crossing the border of Ukraine again. Then there will be no longer a Nord Stream 2. We will bring an end to it.
How will you do that exactly, since the project and control of the project is within Germany's control?
We will, I promise you, we'll be able to do it.
And note that
so then the pipelines actually
Germany's
blew
prime
up.
minister is
These
sitting right
pipelines
next to
that bring
Biden at this
natural
point.
gas from Eastern Europe to Western Europe to keep the European economy going. Natural gas from Eastern Europe to Western Europe to keep the European economy going. And they exploded, causing the single largest human-caused environmental disaster in all of history. And again, setting Europe on the road to actual poverty. So it was an unpopular event, and Joe Biden denied any responsibility. In fact, he blamed Russia. Joe Biden and his whole administration told us that somehow Russia, for reasons they never made clear, just because they're evil, had sabotaged their own energy pipeline. Watch this.
It was a deliberate act of sabotage, and now the Russians are pumping out disinformation and lies.
So that was in September, and it was obvious from the very first day, well, that's not true. It's not that Vladimir Putin is too good a person to blow up Nord Stream, but like, why would he? It only hurts him. And by the way, it really hurts Western Europe. But a lot of media outlets repeated that lie dutifully. That's what they do, and attacked us as Putin stooges for having questions about it. Well, we know a lot more now. There have been a number of official investigations of what happened, and not one has found any evidence of Russian involvement. And now we have the actual answer to what happened. Oh, the Biden administration did it. For real. Investigative reporter Seymour Hersh, who's been around for more than 50 years, just wrote a piece on Substack that includes this, quote, last June, the Navy divers, U.S. Navy divers, operating under the cover of a widely publicized midsummer NATO exercise known as Baltops 22, planted remotely triggered explosives that 3 months later destroyed 3 of the 4 Nord Stream pipelines, according to a source with direct knowledge of the operational planning. Now, this piece continues. It's probably the most comprehensive news story you will read this year. Seymour Hersh on Substack, you should read it. And it recounts in detail meetings with the National Security Advisor at the White House, where this was planned, exactly what explosives were used, how they were triggered, by what aircraft, on what day. So many details in here that it is not possible that it's not true. It is true. And in fact, no one at a high level in the U.S. government is denying it with any specificity. Instead, the White House is just dismissing it as utterly false, and no reporters are following up on this. Amazing. Aaron Mate is following up on it. He's with the Gray Zone. He joins us tonight. Aaron, I don't remember the last time I saw a story this well reported. It wasn't in the New York Times, Hersh's former employer. They wouldn't have run it. But the fact that nobody at the White House briefing today even asked about this story makes me think we are becoming North Korea.
Tucker, this is a case where you have the motive. The U.S. has long been trying to stop the Nord Stream 2 because, as Cy Hersh's story points out, the U.S. has recognized that if Nord Stream 2 goes online, that would make it a lot more difficult for the U.S. to wage a proxy war against Russia, because Germany will not want to be on board with cutting off its source of cheap energy. So the U.S. found an answer to that problem. They blew it up. And it's interesting, Hirsch reports that the planning for this operation began in late 2021. And that's when Russian forces were massing on the border of Ukraine, and there was a threat of the invasion. But something else happened. Russia, in that same month of December 2021, when planning was underway at the White House to blow up Nord Stream 2, Russia also submitted draft treaties to the U.S. and NATO, laying out detailed proposals for the U.S. and NATO to resolve their issues, to roll back NATO military infrastructure in states surrounding Russia. Now, we know what happened to that because the U.S. rejected it, wouldn't even discuss the core issue of Ukraine not joining NATO. Instead, the U.S. chose to basically let the Russian invasion happen, and then when that happened, proceeded to engage in this operation to blow up Nord Stream 2. And they've made no secret about their embrace of this. The day after the Nord Stream 2 was sabotaged, Antony Blinken declared that this was a tremendous strategic opportunity. And most recently, you've covered this, Victoria Nuland testified in Congress that she is grateful, along with the White House, that the Nord Stream 2 is now a hulk of metal at the bottom of the sea.
I mean, NATO is a coalition of European powers led by the United States. The United States just wrecked their economies. I don't see how NATO stays together after this. I don't, but I mean, what do I know? Aaron Mate, I hope you'll come back. Thank you. Subscribe.
All right, well, there you go. I mean, can you possibly imagine this ever appearing on any major network news show in the United States? Well, it did on Tucker Carlson's show, but it did not on MSNBC or CNN or the traditional networks, NBC, CBS, ABC, PBS. Didn't appear on Democracy Now!, not covered in the New York Times, the Washington Post, etc. Nobody talked about Seymour Hersh's story detailing how the Nord Stream pipeline was blown up, or any of the other information that Tucker Carlson and Aaron Mate provided in this segment. Just incredible that this was reported on this supposed far-right warmonger's show. If you believe Ben Norton or Branko Marcetic or any of these other folks who dismiss anyone who substantially disagrees with them about anything as being on the far right, which is ridiculous. Just want to finish up talking about a couple of other things that Tucker covered. Okay, I don't have time to play this segment, but I'll put a link to it in the description. He did a very interesting show on how major financial corporations were, basically destroying the economies of the rural United States. The influence of Wall Street hedge funds is slowly creeping into rural America. So I don't have time to get into that, but just going to mention a couple of other things. In response to somebody who was on the Tucker Carlson as a warmonger bandwagon, I said, the bottom line is that people who advocate going to war with nuclear-armed countries are insane, and Carlson has said just that. Listen to how he responds to this question about the war in Ukraine, and also he brought up China in this segment. So let's just take a look.
Honestly, one of the most compelling arguments for people that, again, I don't even know if this is in rebuttal to you, but they say, how valuable would it be for the United States of America to invest, at this point it looks like $80 billion, $80 billion roughly in a war where we don't lose a single American life, and we hobble one of our geopolitical rivals in Russia. And maybe that's the Dan Crenshaw argument. I don't know. Maybe that, I don't know whose argument. That is definitely an argument made out there that this is actually a very successful policy that doesn't actually, in the end, cost a single American life. What do you say to that?
Well, I mean, I would say a couple of things. One, I don't see Russia as our main rival on the world stage. I don't see it as even approaching that level of threat to the United States. Our main rival is China. And so I have no idea why you wouldn't want Russia on your side, Putin on your side, as some sort of rough alliance against China. And the same would be true for every European and Eurasian country. Why wouldn't you want that? I think that you would if you were serious about...
Okay, so, I mean, basically, he's taking the perspective here that China is somehow hostile to the U.S., or at least that it's a competitor with the U.S., and the U.S. will suffer economically if China wins that competition. But, as you'll see, that doesn't mean he's advocating war with China. Quite the opposite.
The Chinese threat, which of course we're not. So that's the first thing I would say. Second, I'm certainly not for the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm not for anything that destabilizes the world. I'm not pro-Putin in any sense. I don't have strong feelings about Putin or about Russia or about...
Okay, so, they're debunking something he's often been accused of by both liberals and conservatives, that he's somehow pro-Russia, pro the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and so forth. Anyway, let's continue.
About Ukraine, and that's kind of the point. I didn't really see where the American interest in this was. I still don't see it. And I see very clearly now what the downside could be, which is nuclear annihilation. And, nuclear weapons have not been used since the summer of 1945, when we destroyed Nagasaki. And so our understanding of nuclear weapons is almost 80 years old. But the technology has advanced to the point where, and talk to anyone who understands it, and I have, to the point where, I mean, it's hard to comprehend how destructive it is. A nuclear strike on New York would eliminate New York and also destroy North Carolina. So, these are weapons that are much more powerful than the average person understands. Putin is, if he's as crazy and evil as they tell us he is, why wouldn't he use them? So a victory over Putin is not necessarily a win for us. It's very easy to see how beating Putin would mean destroying ourselves. And I'm completely baffled as to why you'd even want to risk that. And if I'm being totally honest, I would say the second people start talking about nuclear strikes, whether they're tactical nukes or limited nuclear engagements or whatever, that's the moment when I look back and say, you're insane. You have no idea what you're talking about. I saw David Petraeus, who reportedly is very smart. I've met him. It seems smart, I guess. He was saying, well, if Russia uses nuclear weapons in Ukraine, we'll blow up the Black Sea Fleet. And it's like, first of all, if anybody uses nuclear weapons in any theater, we're on the brink of destroying the world, and that's not an exaggeration at all. So you don't even want to have that. That's so reckless and crazy that I can't believe. Again, I'm astounded by the recklessness of the people in charge. That should never be on the table. That should never be under consideration. It should only be implied. And I think that previous generations of generals and statesmen and presidents and secretaries of state understood that implicitly. They didn't need to be told, if you're talking about nuclear strikes, you've already lost, you freaking lunatic.
And I think you just
Yeah, I guess he didn't actually specifically mention China there, but he basically just said, if you go to war with a nuclear power, you're risking a nuclear war, which would be the end of all of us. Let's see. He also had Representative Dennis Kucinich on his show, as well as Tulsi Gabbard talking about their trip to Syria, where they basically talked about how horrible the civil war there was, and the extensive U.S. involvement being responsible for much of this destruction. So let's take a look at this.
Well, the Middle East is a strange place. It can always get stranger, of course. Democratic Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard of Hawaii announced today that she and former Congressman Dennis Kucinich of Ohio traveled to Syria and met Syrian President Bashar al-Assad during a secret trip there. What exactly happened while they were on the ground? Fox News national security correspondent Jennifer Griffin joins us with the latest on this story. Jen, this is amazing.
Well, the Middle East makes for strange bedfellows, Tucker. Senior Trump officials tell me Congressman Tulsi Gabbard was not sent to Syria on their behalf. She and former Congressman Dennis Kucinich sat down with Syrian President Bashar Assad in Damascus.
When the opportunity arose to meet with him, I did so because I felt it's important that if we profess to truly care about the Syrian people, about their suffering, then we've got to be able to meet with anyone that we need to if there is a possibility that we could achieve peace.
I spoke to Kucinich and his wife Elizabeth today about why they went.
That's Dennis Kucinich on the left.
Did President Bashar Assad have a message for the American people or for the Trump administration?
He described the efforts of his country to be able to keep a pluralistic society alive, to be able to withstand 93 different groups coming in from 100 different countries to try to capsize Syria. They're blowing up churches and mosques and making it impossible for a culture to be able to come back together again. This is really it goes far beyond what anybody thought it was in 2011. Jihadists are using Syria as a platform to train their troops. And where will they export the next violence to? This is something that America has to be concerned about.
And aren't you concerned about the U.S. teaming up with Russia and Iran to work with the Assad regime? Because Russia and Iran have different interests than the U.S.
I actually believe that it's important that President Trump has moved forward to build a relationship with Russia. And if President Trump is able to reach a détente with Russia and to work with Russia to solve issues of regional security and international security, that can only work out to the benefit of the United States of America. We can no longer afford to spend the treasure of our country abroad in these wars. He said that as much in his inaugural. Because remember, those conflicts over there, these terrorist groups are using that region as a training ground, and then we've got to worry about it coming back on the United States.
People consider President Assad a war criminal. His regime and his military is responsible for nearly 500,000 deaths. How do you sitting with President Assad, who largely is viewed as a war criminal around the world?
So here's the choice right now that the world has. You can let ISIS set up camp in Damascus and use it to change the entire region, which means the destruction of Christians and Muslims who are of another sect, and also the concomitant effect on Israel that is inevitable if that happens. Or you can try to stabilize the region and let the people of Syria make their own decisions about who their leaders are going to be.
Wouldn't they be?
Their trip was funded by the Arab American Community Center for Economic and Social Services, a nonprofit based in Cleveland. One point of fact, Tucker, last Friday, while the president was being inaugurated here in Washington, Russia was renewing a 50-year lease for military bases and a port in Syria.
It's interesting. President Trump, as a candidate, expressed sympathy for the Christians in that country being slaughtered. They really are caught in the middle of it. And you wonder to what extent he agrees with Tulsi Gabbard's position on this.
Well, it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see if the White House calls her in and asks her about the trip.
Wouldn't surprise me at all. She's going to be a guest on the show later this week. Look forward to it. Thank you.
Okay, so he had Tulsi Gabbard on later that week to talk about her trip to Syria. Shortly after that, there was a chemical weapons attack in Syria in April of 2018, and the U.S. of course blamed this on the Syrian government, and there was never any evidence that the Syrian government did this, and Fox and Tucker Carlson on Fox questioned whether whether there was any proof. Fox News host Tucker Carlson has crossed in mainstream media Rubicon and questioned the Duma gas attack fraud on air, bringing up the OPCW whistleblower, the Organization for Prevention of Chemical Weapons, investigated this gas attack in Douma, Syria, and found no evidence that the Syrian government had anything to do with it. Carlson boldly then he quote rooted for Russia over Ukraine. Was it a betrayal or epic truth-telling? Carlson boldly went where no mainstream TV host had gone before, unpacking the explosive story of April 2018's Douma chemical weapons attack. While the attack was attributed to Syrian President Bashar al-Assad by an altered report from the Organization for the Prevention of Chemical Weapons, two whistleblowers within the group accused it of omitting evidence to craft a misleading narrative, a fact that had never crossed the lips of U.S. media until Monday night. The Columbia Bugle, which is a site of Tucker Carlson's, link to the segment must watch Tucker Carlson segment tonight. The new evidence shows Syria's Assad may have been falsely blamed for 2018 chemical attack. We've been lied to, we've been manipulated, we knew it at the time. Okay, well, let's...
Well, despite the president's repeated efforts to get them out, American troops remain deployed in parts of Syria. If Washington has its way, they will be there until you are old, or even longer, forever. But it could be worse. 19 months ago, Washington was demanding that the U.S. government topple the Assad government completely. Must do it now. The justification for this was a supposed chemical weapons attack in the town of Douma. Now, no one in Washington had seen the attack. No American had seen it. Nobody in Congress could tell you what proof existed that the attack had actually taken place or that Assad's government was behind it rather than some other faction, and there were many, in the country's civil war. But it didn't matter that there was literally no evidence. Everybody in Washington began agitating for regime change war immediately. Immediately, and especially on the left. Bill Kristol and Max Boot and everyone at MSNBC and CNN, they were completely for it. This show was not for it. We didn't deny the attack happened. We just told people to be skeptical. Universal bipartisan agreement on anything is usually the first sign that something deeply unwise is about to happen, if only because there is nobody left to ask skeptical questions. And we should be skeptical.
Okay, this was like the day after the attack. Tucker Carlson already expressing skepticism about whether the Syrian government committed the attack. Let's skip ahead.
Well, fortunately, President Trump limited his response to another wave of missile strikes rather than sending U.S. troops, which is the group that monitors chemical weapons. He thought the canisters were placed by hand by someone on the ground, which would make it okay. But then last May, a leaked internal document showed that one of the OPCW's top analysts disagreed with that conclusion. He thought the canisters were placed by hand by someone on the ground, which would make it a completely different event. Now, this week, WikiLeaks has published an email from a member of the OPCW's fact-finding team. That email accuses the organization of altering investigators' original findings to make evidence of an attack look more conclusive than it actually was. Sound familiar? Yeah, we've seen this movie before, with tragic consequences. Yet another OPCW whistleblower...
I think he's talking about the fabricated weapons of mass destruction claims about Iraq there, which, of course, at the time, Tucker Carlson favored the Iraq War. He certainly doesn't favor that or war in general now. Let's see, does he interview anybody? Okay, well, anyway, so he reported something that you would never see again on any mainstream media outlet in the country except on his show on Fox. I forgot to mention one other thing he said at the Heritage Foundation dinner the Friday before he was fired on Monday, April 24th. At his, no, excuse me, it was Thursday. At his keynote address at the Heritage Foundation, he mentioned, as he did on his show, I believe the following night, that the U.S. Government, the FBI, had arrested black members of the Uhuru Party, Socialist Party, on fabricated charges, it appears, claiming that they were Russian agents or something to that effect, and said basically, it's because they opposed the war in Ukraine, which he is also, of course, opposed. So, I could go on about what he has said on his show, but just especially within the last couple of years, he has repeatedly brought up topics and points of view and brought on guests critical of the U.S. political establishment, of both major political parties and of their foreign as well as domestic policies, over and over and over again. So, we don't know for sure why Tucker Carlson was let go by Rupert Murdoch, the CEO of Fox News and owner of a vast media empire throughout his native Australia and elsewhere. But I think it's a pretty good bet that it's because Tucker Carlson was just saying too many things that the powers that be in this country, and in Rupert Murdoch land, didn't want people to hear about. And again, I'll post some links to these segments that I showed and others in the video description. I'm probably going to write a Substack article on this, jeffmelton.substack.com, pretty soon, so stay tuned for that. But you look at the evidence and you be the judge. I don't think that Tucker Carlson was fired because he was a religious nut, or that it was because of his supposed conservative views on a conservative network. It just doesn't pass the sniff test. All right, I will see everybody next time.